My view on this is that you've kind of got the short-term timescale and the longer-term timescale. I mean, I think over the next 2 years, there's going to be noise, there's going to be confusion, uncertainty, doubt, fear, all those wonderful human emotions that come out at times like this. And I think that's actually going to create a huge amount of opportunity, probably for the larger companies, particularly around M&A. I think for investors going in and buying into public markets, volatility from an investor perspective is actually quite a good thing. I think, the reality of what's going to play out if you take a 10-year view on this is that the UK is going to have to end up putting in place so many agreements to try and come close to replicating what already exists that over a 10-year time horizon you can see a situation where we end up with some scenario that really doesn't look all that different from today. It's going to be messy getting to that point, I totally agree. And so that's kind of the best advice that we can give to our portfolio. For the ones that have scaled out across Europe, it's slightly less of an issue. I think for any early stage tech company, the real concern that is magnified in the last 6 months is definitely going to be hiring. When you consider the amount of inbound headcount that comes from across Europe, anyone who's got an operation in the UK right now is being asked almost daily and weekly by their employees, what's the deal? Can I stay here? And no one can really give them a straight answer. And I think, and again, you sort of think about how this sort of impacts companies that are growing in the UK over time. This is why this will have to be addressed, and you're going to end up with a situation that sort of resembles what.
I mean, just on that, there is a sense that FinTech is a bit of a bubble, a bit of a dot-com bubble, and is going to burst sometime soon. And one of the kind of contributing factors to that is talent. A lot of UK tech businesses go to Europe to get the talent to drive those businesses forward. And Innovative Finance has done some assessment of investment into FinTech, and it's decreased threefold over the last 9 months. So, we're starting to see some indications that from a FinTech perspective in the UK that we are, there are some Brexit consequences.
But on that point, I mean, I would reiterate this to everyone. As bad as it gets, and it will get worse, it is the best time to be starting companies, because everyone else is going to be scared shitless, which means you're going to have less competition. And you've got to remember, the thing about times like this is that everyone reacts in the moment, whereas if you actually read history and you look at the investment opportunities and the greatest return that happen either from direct investing or building or starting, they tend to start in times like these. So people, instead of being scared, should look for the opportunities, because you'll have less competition for 2 or 3 or 4 years.
John, in terms of what you're seeing and hearing in the UK, then is the message different to what we're talking about here in Ireland?
So I think a number of you mentioned exposure already. I feel pretty exposed as the token Englishman.
Good.
You know what it's like to be a Scotsman.
I think it's really interesting. I think you can look at it 2 ways. So multinationals will continue to do what they've always done, which is look after their own interests, and they've got resource and money to put think tanks and task forces together and employ the very best talent out there to analyse what they need to do and what markets they need to be in and what their currency exposure should be and whether they hedge this or hedge that. So, they will continue to be pretty okay. This market and this audience is about growth businesses, scale-ups, SMEs, etc. And I think what we're seeing a lot of, actually, to reinforce John's comment, is not a lot. Not many companies are really taking the opportunity to look and to reflect and decide what they do as a result of Brexit. I think a lot of it is just keep calm and carry on. If you look at I think Brexit has led to a significant amount of navel gazing and introspection and reflection in the UK over the last 9 months. Some of it has been positive, I think some of it has been quite negative. Brexit can be analysed through a variety of different lenses. You can analyse it through the social lens, through the political lens, through the economic lens. And it has been and will continue to be analysed on that basis on a daily, frequent basis. I think from a business perspective, it's analysed less. And certainly, SME type businesses are just cracking on with what they've been doing. And actually, the more enlightened, I think, are using this as an opportunity. And as one commentator said far cleverer than I, luck comes when preparedness meets opportunity. And so the opportunity is there. What we're not seeing huge amounts of is businesses taking the time to become prepared for what Brexit could look like. But the ones that we're seeing agility, we're seeing people actually use this as an opportunity to look at a variety of different aspects of their business, look at the supply chain, look at where their suppliers are, look at hedging, look at forward contracting, look at their talent, and whether, now that we're certainly from a FinTech and European perspective, we're potentially creating barriers and issues to get the talent and the skills into the UK that are required to drive the businesses that relied on that talent and skills to get them to where they are. That then means, okay, well, where else do we look? Do we go back to our more traditional, Commonwealth countries? Do we look to Canada? Do we look to Australia and New Zealand? What does the US mean with Trump? And Trump's certainly an opportunity in a lot of ways.
Unless you're in the CIA.
Yeah, well, there you go. So I think, the reality is that a lot of people aren't looking at it, I don't think, properly from a business perspective. I think the ones that are using it as an opportunity to assess a variety of aspects of their value chain will be the ones that are better placed when stuff starts to filter through.
I guess that's what we're seeing in Ireland as well now, that companies are not really embracing it and saying we need to prepare, which is the objective behind our scorecard, is to prompt companies to actually look at specific things that they can do to act now.
Yeah.
We asked our members in the Dublin Chamber, I think late last year, what are you doing for Brexit? And about 50% of them said they have no contingency plan for Brexit. So that's a bit of a marking exercise, I guess, for you, and to really make them think, to get the head out the sand, to start thinking about, one, how they react to the business that they're currently doing, but maybe also to look beyond the UK to new markets, which I'm guessing is quite an intimidating step. The UK's always been a fairly comfy, natural first step for companies here, but what's happening there? Are people now looking further afield, or is that a struggle to get them to do that?
They are. Of all the things we're seeing happening among companies who are starting to prepare, moving into new markets is probably the biggest one. And that's something that we have been pushing long before Brexit was even imagined. For the last 10 years, we have got our companies to diversify, so they moved from a 45% dependence on the UK to 37%, and we're aiming to bring that down to 33% by 2020. So we're seeing companies moving into new markets, and there are some obvious ones, like the Eurozone, which is right on our doorstep, but that brings challenges, and that's something that we need to work with our companies on.
Dylan, can I ask you, when we hear, all the time, we pick up the paper every day, and apparently some other company is looking at Dublin as a place to come and locate, quite often in the tech space or financial space. Is that what's really happening in terms of the tech startup scene, in terms of the early stage companies? Are they looking at Dublin as a place to come, or is that all a bit of smoke and mirrors going on there?
I'm smiling at Niamh because she and I have had this conversation a few times. I really think it depends. I mean, the nature of tech startups when they're growing in their early is they usually need a bunch of capital, and they usually end up having to relocate somewhat closer to that capital. And Ireland is often, although not always, seen sort of the emergence of companies that start here and then move to the UK, move to the Valley, or sometimes move to New York as they follow that kind of growth capital. And I think the challenge, for and this is specifically for technology startups and early stage and high growth, is that the need for capital and the need to be in proximity to capital is going to outweigh politics, and they will go to where the capital is. And even if that means putting themselves at something of a disadvantage, they will have to do that. And again, this is kind of comes back to my view on this, that you can look at the politics of the situation, or you can look at sort of the respective political bodies' self-interest. Right, and it really isn't in anyone's interest for Brexit to actually work in the way that's being talked about. It simply isn't. It makes no sense, right? It's not in the EU's interest. It's not in the UK's economic interest. And I think that startups are sort of looking at this, and when you talk to a lot of them, and you've represented this as well, it's kind of, I suppose, a synthesis of what people are saying here. Their conclusion is, we're just going to not read the news for the next 2 years, and we're going to focus on executing and building, right? And I, to a degree, I think that is pretty good practical advice, because it's they are not going to be able to influence what is going to happen one way or the the other.
Right.
They have to focus on, who are the clients, what do they want, how do they solve it. So I think that in terms of Dublin being a relocation hub for a lot of startups who begin outside of Ireland, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be something we're going to see.
Yeah.
Not because Dublin isn't a good place for startups, it certainly is, but if you look at sort of the weighted growth capital in particular,
Yeah.
it's everywhere else.
Yeah.
I think it's probably going to accelerate more movement towards the US.
Right.
And I've been in, weirdly, a lot of conversations where actually people are kind of going, well, which political environment is less bad, America or Europe? That's a curious conversation.
That's something you've been working very hard on in the British Irish Chamber,
Yeah.
John, is to market Dublin and state the
Big
case
time,
for
yeah,
Dublin.
yeah, and so, okay, so don't watch the news, but stuff that's going to happen, and let's get real, they're leaving, they're not staying, they're not going to change their mind, they're going to leave. They may come back in 10 years' time.
They're going to try. They're going to try.
They're going to leave. And the issue with that, is already biting for companies. So people are making decisions, and business is pragmatic. It doesn't wait around for 2 years or 5 years or 7 years. It says, what's the story now? For lots and lots of tech companies, it doesn't matter all that much. And actually, small-size service firms are best equipped to deal with this because they don't have to move a factory or they don't have to deal in physical goods and stuff like that. But shoving data outside the UK for most tech companies is going to become a question mark, and it's far from. In fact, everybody knows about the tariffs on beef and butter, but there is no tariff on services. It's not in the WTO. So that's your cliff. And my point on what Dylan would say about you can't make an impact. So I think you have a huge impact to make actually, because politicians definitely and officials in many cases don't know this stuff about what makes trade happen. I mean, there are 60,000 trading businesses in Ireland who have never touched a customs document. 60,000 of them. So opportunity one, we know about ag tech and health tech and other tech. Brex tech, that's the one to watch. People who are going to need solutions for customs, boring stuff, customs, proof of origin, you name it. See me after class. There's shed loads of this stuff, and people will make money out of that. But in the short term, sitting still and saying it'll go away is not a strategy. And I get the bit about go to capital. Of course, you've got to do that anyway. But you still got to serve 500 million consumers or a remaining 440 million consumers in the European market. And you might not be able to do that from the UK, and you probably won't be able to do it from the US. So getting to the EU is important. This is the best alternative market to the UK as a base.
So, John, I suppose there's been a bit of surprise here in Dublin, I think, especially in the business community, that there's not been more of a reaction towards Brexit that was like, whoa, let's stop this in some way.
I think there has been quite a lot of reaction towards
I
Brexit.
think the feeling, we were over at a meeting of chambers in London a few weeks ago, and the reaction there was that there's no way this is ever not going to happen. This is happening, and that kind of seems to be the vibe we've got from the beginning. As soon as the vote happened, okay, this is going ahead. Is that true, or is
Yeah, I think it depends on how you define. I think there was a massive existential reaction when it first happened by a large part of the UK and certainly the so-called elite in London. There was a massive reaction to it. I remember going to a meeting the morning after, and it was no one could believe that it had happened. I think there was just shock, and then it was, well, why has this happened? Because if you read any poll, it was saying 60% were going to vote Remain at least. So any poll, every poll was saying this isn't going to happen. So I think people reflected as to why huge swathes of the country did something that a lot of people thought was just fundamentally incorrect. To break away from the European Union in that way just felt so wrong. So I think there was an existential reaction. I then think people did a lot of navel gazing and looked at the country. There was this whole argument about the elite in London has driven globalisation, and it was the media that underpins that put out these messages that of course it was never going to happen, but actually the majority of the country isn't in London and doesn't work in the city. So then it was, well, what have we done as a country? I think there was a desire that we should be this sovereign state, and the heritage and tradition that goes with that, which frankly is depends on your political point of view. So I think there was huge reaction. Where we are now, I think people are pissed off. I think people are bored. I think people have had enough. We've now got a bloody general election to exercise our minds. I think people have just kind of had enough with it. And we're at the point now, business is just thinking, well, I've got all of these variables, there's things going on around the world, it seems to be unpredictable, we've got the whole death of the expert, and so people just think, well, Christ, I'll just carry on. I'll carry on because actually, if I can influence what's important to me, and if I can have control over the small number of things that I can have an impact on, then that's good enough. And there is so many things going on that I have no influence on, no impact on. And it will happen, stuff will happen, Brexit will happen, deals will be done, things will filter out, and I'll deal with it.
It's volatility, it's the best bit. This is where all the interesting stuff happens. This is the bit that you flip to in the book.
Well, and John's point about
it is.
About the stuff in customs. I agree. I'm speaking to a guy who's got a European supply chain, and he said, right, he's one of the people that is getting ready and is preparing. He's taking a end-to-end route to branches look at his supply chain. And he is considering all these elements around customs, and he is already looking for providers of services that will enable him to do that, because he doesn't want to give, he doesn't give a monkeys about it, but he knows it's going to become a problem, he knows it's going to become a cost, he knows it's going to introduce inefficiency into his existing supply chain, so he's looking at how he gets around that.
And this is why the libertarian in me is kind of excited about this sort of stuff. Right? It has a lot of negative consequences, but it's the only time you start to see an environment where you can actually see change that becomes maybe possible in society. Right? You can't get there in any linear sense. You have to break some stuff to get there.
I just think we've created just a different version of the future. If we'd have continued as we were, there are pros and cons to that particular situation. There will be disruptors, there will be winners, there will be losers. We've made a decision. It's a groundbreaking decision. Not everyone agreed with it, but we've just created a new version of the future. And within that version of the future, there will be winners, there will be losers, there will be things we don't like, things we do like. It's just a new version of the future. And I think the people that are driving this forward and using it as an opportunity to rethink their supply chain, or using it as an opportunity to access different markets and different clients customers that they probably wouldn't have ordinarily thought about, are the ones that will be the winners. And then there will be people who do nothing and will still win because the stuff that happens that won't really impact them.
Yeah, but there'll be people who do nothing and go out of business.
Yeah, no, agreed. But then,
so that's not.
But then that would have existed before the vote anyway.
I mean, it is possible to shape the future. We touched on this. If all of us say, well, we can do nothing about this, if everybody does that solo thing, so I'll just work with the 6 inches around me, that's not going to. We're not going to win on that because somebody's going to do stuff to us. So the answer to that, we talk about 3.5 steps to Brexit-proof your business. It's very easy for most small businesses. The first one is you stop winging it on currency. Those days are over. Currency is volatile now. It's not part of your business plans. I'll cover it in one form of it. Second one is if you're a UK company established inside the EU, that's here. Don't close anything. Just open up here. Loads of people, and lots of other people can help you to do that. And if you're an Irish company, do the exact same in reverse. The UK market is and will remain huge. Get yourself some boots on the ground in the UK, and we can help you with that. And the 3.5 step is actually very important. It's about shaping the future rather than it shape you. It's about advocacy. It's about giving solutions to diplomats and government ministers to say, this is how we want it to be. These are the ways we'll run open soft border. These are the way we'll run free movement of people. These are the way we'll run special sectors that need protection and stuff like that. Hand the solutions forward. That'll come from people in the room here on behalf of the sector, working with the Chambers movement, guys like you, people like me, with EI, other people to say, we want this future, not the one that somebody else is going to hand to us.
What's your view, John, on the government reaction to the Brexit vote? Have they done enough? Is it more they could
listen,
do?
the Irish government has done a fantastic job. It is an unbelievable achievement of Irish diplomatic skills and the cooperation of our friends in the UK and indeed the EU that we have got this tiny little island behind a slightly larger island out in the ocean, that this island has got a special card, and it's called, there's something about Ireland in terms of EU membership, that the impact of Brexit on this tiny little island is more important than for many other people, and therefore it needs to be addressed in some way. But as Timmermans, the Vice President of the EU, said, and it will take all of Ireland's famed creativity to come up with the ways and means by which we can make that happen for you. So we, nobody else, need to come up with the ways, practicable solutions that comply with EU law, but move the game forward to say, you want open border, you want tech businesses to flow between Dublin and London, etc., etc. We're going to work out how to do that and give those answers to the diplomats so that they can get that stuff over the negotiating line.
If there's one thing tech firms need, it's good staff. Abroad, so free movement of people is something that's got to come out of this, particularly for the UK.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a very simple answer.
Do you think that's going to happen?
Do you know what? I can't. I won't reach into my political crystal ball and
I'm going to say,
I think
yes, it will. It'll.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, by the way, if there isn't free movement of people, there is an opportunity for Irish tech companies who are finding it very difficult to find top tech at the moment. In fact, we have a programme running at the moment, Tech Live Ireland, to attract tech talent into Ireland. So maybe there are people in the UK who would rather come here now.
So in the week after the vote, a bunch of influencers and commentators and leaders associated with Tech City, so Tech City in London, in and around the Silicon Roundabout, they got together, I think there was about over 500 signatories, wrote an open letter to the government and said, you absolutely need to guarantee free movement of people, because if you don't, this nascent sector, this sector which is aspiring to challenge Silicon Valley in some ways, is going to die, because it is so reliant on European talent.
Upskilling of staff here in Dublin is probably a big thing as well, and is that something that Enterprise Ireland are working with companies to do?
Yeah, one of the skills that we've identified actually around Brexit, but I guess maybe the issue was always there, was financial management, strong financial management, and John referred to it in terms of, just not winging it on currency. It's not actually just about currency, it's about understanding your financial position and being able to see ahead so that you are ready for, whatever is going to come down the line at you, if your cash flows are right, so that you can go to your provider and say, well, I'm going to need this amount of money in a year's time or whatever. So that operational finance and the strategic finance is very important and something we're working with our companies now,
Dylan, is there anything in terms of reacting to Brexit, is there anything you've done in particular in your company to, I'm talking about Super Awesome here, in terms of changes you've made to this term goes around Brexit proof, but is that on your radar? Have you had to make changes in fear of the worst? Or?
I think the most notable thing we've done is more frequent communications with everyone about what we know is going on. Because I think that, and you see that, I know that Will and the guys are doing that in Deliveroo as well. I guess 50-60% of our headcount is European. Deliveroo is probably the same, probably larger in fact. And people don't know what's going on. So as a management team, or with all the management teams, we're saying, look, have weekly updates. Even if you're not saying anything different, let people know that let your team know that you're thinking about it, and let them know that if and when things start to change, that you are going to be prepared to react. I think we've spent more time with lawyers on the HR side, specifically on that. But I think at the moment part of the challenge is that for any company that doesn't have the resources of a multinational, there's some things they can go and think about, but in terms of actual actionable employment-related HR things, it's quite difficult. And that's part of the challenge. I think that the other thing we're advising companies to do is, to your point on finance, is companies should always be thinking, for the companies that are venture-backed, you should always be thinking about the next round of capital. And I would absolutely be accelerating those conversations. Not because I think long-term there are going to be issues, but it's not impossible that there's going to be some disruption to the flow of venture capital, particularly across the UK when you look at how much money comes out of EIF into venture funds. So I would definitely be thinking about financial planning from that perspective.
So I'm keen that everyone here gets what they want out of this session, so I might at this point just open it up to the floor. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask any of the panel? Shy.
Well, we solved everything.
Maybe it's not as big a topic as we thought.
Quick question just that scoreboard exercise, is that on your website? Or
It is, yeah. It's on prepareforbrexit.com. .ie, it's on both of them, but yeah. And anybody can use the scorecard. You don't need to be an enterprise Ireland client.
What's the take-up been like on that one?
We have had about 500 so far, and we would like to see a lot more. Again, going back to, I think people are not really addressing Brexit yet, and there are really straightforward and simple things you can do to get started, and it sends you towards those, actions. One thing I would recommend everybody does is talk to your customers. Find out how they're being impacted. Find out, have they got plans that you really should know about, so that, it might be a threat, but it might also be an opportunity for you. But to answer your question, yeah, it's there on prepareforbrexit.com, and be looking out for your...
Is that something you talk about with your fellow co-founders, your fellow investors, Dylan, about share advice on Brexit-related reactions that they've had to take?
In so much as I can. Again, there's a lot of chatter, not a huge amount of concrete. And I think that, most of if you look at the Hoxton portfolio for the companies that are all in Europe, there's very few that are just based in one country. So they're all dealing with that same level of uncertainty. They're all asking the same questions.
It's not a sectoral thing?
No, specifically around hiring, which tends to be the common denominator, at least that we see across the portfolio, where the concerns are. So I would say beyond that now.
In terms of what your staff are saying to you, are they concerned about, you mentioned there that a lot of your workforce come from elsewhere. Are they coming to you and saying, looking for reassurance? Or?
Biggest question we get, I don't know how many times a week, is am I going to be allowed to stay in the UK? Right. Absolutely. And it's particularly with most startups, we've across companies, in fact, we've got a high percentage of people under 25, under 27. In many cases, it's their first job out of college, and they don't know what they should be doing. They're being freaked out by their friends, or they're being freaked out by their parents, or they're being freaked out by whatever personalised newsfeed they're seeing. So more and more, we're advising them just turn off Facebook. It's going to be one of my more popular comments, isn't it? Try and focus on what is objectively actually happening, rather than too much of the speculation. But that's definitely, again, my point about distraction. Like the next 2 years is going to be, as well as whatever material changes actually do happen, it's going to be just huge amounts of distraction.
Do you want to make the Facebook comment to the camera again? Just so I have a good shot of it.
I'm sure someone got it already.
If anyone else has a question, just throw. Yep.
Just I've heard expressed is that one of the things you need to do around Brexit is collaborate rather than worrying about your own company competing with your competitors. Focus more on collaboration because of an extended period of uncertainty. Any comments from the panel on this opportunity to collaborate?
Yeah, it's vital, Patrick. Yeah, so we've got a great saying in Irish. It's called Ninjark Curla Kayla. We're at our best when we're working together. This would be a good time to just suspend normal hostilities, whoever you're having them with, and say we've got a shared interest in what happens next here. So, and I am obsessed with this business, but you can make the outcome. It's not going to get done to us unless we let it. So, talk about Dublin. Niamh ran amazing stuff here in the last couple of years to really get the story out that we're open for business. And she was as equally able to say, and we need to fix certain things. And we still have to get on with that. So at a national level, there's an absolute national, this is our TK Whittaker moment. This is like the guy 60 years ago who had nothing and could see even less in the future. And he said, we're not going to settle for that. We're going to build something. We're going to invest in education and skills, the precursor to techno-innovation piece that from whence we all came, and an industrial strategy that taught us to look up and out. What do you want our kids to say, or our grandkids to say, in 60 years' time about the choices that we've got the privilege to make now? That's the way we need to think. We need to join hands together and say we're going to make this future the way we want it, not the other way around. And that's on everything from getting broadband out there good and fast, and getting baccalaureate schools, all the things that inbound people are going to look for in this town, in this country, about spreading the recovery and the offer to be a national, regional highways and byways offer, not just in the urban areas, and about working with our friends in the UK actually, because something we always traded with the UK and we always will. The only issue is how much value would be taken out of that by tariffs and other barriers. So the issue is actually there's an opportunity to create a UK-Ireland powerhouse that says regardless of whatever happens to the rules, we'll always do business and we'll be a place where talent feels naturally drawn to do stuff, creative, inventive, technological stuff that's better than anywhere else in the world, and to paint that vision for Dillon's employees and say, stick around, we're going to make the future.
So, John, do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was on a panel earlier around scale-ups and the conditions for success that need to be present in order for you to go from startup to scale-up, from growth to super growth. And I think one of the things that really struck me was just this shared spirit and culture and ethos the UK and Ireland has around entrepreneurship, around innovation, around creation, around disruption, around trying new things. And I think that is something to be fostered. I think that is something to be harnessed. I think that is something that will lead to increasing collaboration. Because we do share a shared sense of optimism, I think, and enthusiasm. And it's that we need to harness now, and it's that I think will define what success looks like in the future. And I think it's that will create and maximise and leverage the opportunities that will inevitably be coming our way as a result of what's happening.
We need more non-politicians going into politics from this generation. I think you've got a contributing factor to a lot of the issues we're seeing out there is you have people who either don't have experience or simply aren't competent enough to be managing the politics of this society, this generation. And I think, hopefully again, one of the outcomes of this whole period is that it is encouraging people to get directly into politics. Because yes, in terms of lobbying politicians and that the political sector, absolutely. But I think so many of them just are out of touch and are not capable of doing what they need to do. So we need to see more non-political politicians.
Yeah.
If anyone's interested.
Encouraging people to get involved in politics, and what do you see the barriers?
I just did suggest it. That's what I'm going to do.
So why are they doing it?
Why are they doing it? What are the barriers? I would argue probably the impressions they have of current politicians, right? I mean, they are not. I mean, you talked about leadership, right? That is one of the most common things that at least I don't see across the board, right? It's why we have TV personalities winning elections. Literally, that's the reason, because there is no actual political leadership being demonstrated, or very, very, very little, if that's the case. And I think that that has to be encouraged by people of our age and younger generations, choosing to get into politics, because if they don't, no one else is going to go and make a difference. And I think that you've got enough, supporting, new money that's floating around that will be very, very helpful for anyone who chooses to go down that path. But now is the time that we need it more than anything else. I mean, if you look at everyone who is involved in all of the Brexit conversations, can you really point to any of them that you can describe as being inspiring? Not hearing anyone shout a name.
But even if our business people don't turn into politicians, or if our young people don't turn into politicians, I think that business can influence politics more than it does at the moment. And I think this is the point that John was making. It is important to lobby the government and to come out with ideas, because remember, as Dylan says, maybe they're not able to do it, maybe they can't come up with the ideas in politics, but you can. And I think that that's where also collaboration can work, where you work together and say, look, this is what we want to see from our government in terms of Brexit. This is what has to happen now. We need, for example, a more competitive working environment. Ireland is not typically competitive. We don't have proper infrastructure in broadband, in our road infrastructure, across our insurance, our professional fees, everything is extremely expensive. I think we need to see business pushing back against that and saying to politicians, you need to change this. You need to make the environment competitive for us.
Dylan Collins' Taoiseach has a bit of a ring to it.
Not with the amount of people I've pissed off.
That's a good question, actually. So,
We want names.
so we've a budget coming up.
I don't do anything in Russia.
I heard John speaking Irish. I don't do anything in Irish. So if the budget's coming up in October, if you can encourage the government to do anything, John, what would that be?
Well, the first thing is we've got to run ourselves right. I mean, if there was no Brexit, we'd still have to run ourselves right. And on the don't waste a good crisis, people will support doing tougher things when it's a tougher world or a less certain world out there. So if we don't take this now and get everything that we need to run right today, then on our heads be it. And that includes, it's not just about the capital plan and building the roads and hurrying up the broadband and building the houses and all those important things. It's about equity and equitability or whatever that is, like what's going on in France, what's going on in the US, what's going on in every Rust Belt. A woman stood up in this room at something I was involved in recently. She said, that's all very well for Dublin. She says, I'm from the Rust Belt of Ireland. So where's that? She said, Port Arlington. She said, every second shop is a pound shop and every other shop is closed. So we're having this conversation in a certain environment. It's tough for people. And people have been rebelling because it's tough for them and are not included. So if I was part of the process on that, I'd be saying, how much of our resources, in the broadest sense, are we going to allocate to stop the ebbing away of equity in society? Because that's going to kill us if we don't do something about it. We do also need to take care of the physical stuff. And then we need to think of long-term stuff. We've got a report, we're good on reports in this country, sitting on the Department of Education's shelf for the last 2 years called the Cassell's report. It is the way to fund education and skills for the next 50 years. It's a tough political call. That's why we ask politicians to step forward and say, you want my vote? I'll vote for you if you have the cojones to make choices. We need to make choices about long-term education in this country and other stuff like that. They're big things. All the small things will be fine if we take care of the big things.
Any other questions for the guys? Paul?
Following on from John's comment about the UK-Ireland powerhouse as an opportunity, if I was to ask each of the panellists, is there a single bet that you'd be prepared to make on a sector that's going to benefit as a result of Brexit? What would it be?
Brextech. What's that space?
Yeah. Legal.
I think that's down to the sectors to decide which ones of them want to get something out of Brexit. There is an opportunity here for Ireland actually to grow and be more independent. And I think we need to do that now. And not every sector will be able to do it. And I think there will be companies, as John said, who are just not going to make it. But there can be sectors who come out of this at the other side, through and beyond Brexit, and they look back and they go, oh my God, it was Brexit that changed our lives. I met the Australians recently, and they were explaining to me that when the UK joined the EU, it was a huge problem for Australia. 95% of their dairy exports at that time were going to the UK, all the way from Australia to the UK. And they felt totally betrayed, and they had to totally relook at what they were doing. So they looked on their doorstep, and there was Asia. And they developed a whole strategy around selling into Asia and exporting into Asia. And now they have a fantastic relationship with Asia. They still have a very good relationship with the UK. But they look back now and they say, it was the best thing that ever happened. So we have to, in Ireland, be able to look back in 10 or 20 years' time and say, actually, Brexit was the best thing that ever happened to us. And that might be we have a UK-Ireland powerhouse. It might be that we are much stronger into the Eurozone. It might be that we have a relationship with whatever it is, we can't say now. But it's down to you and others like you to help us to make sure that we do look back in 20 years' time and say it was the best thing that ever happened to Ireland.
Can I come back to the budget question?
Yeah, sure.
The other thing, which I think desperately needs to be done here, is Department of Finance needs to look at the EIS structure in the UK and capital gains tax. Copy, paste, done. Like, it is criminal, in my view, in terms of fostering new company growth, that EIS in the UK has not been replicated line for line here. I see no logic why it hasn't been. It makes no sense.
Yeah. I mean, interesting. So to answer your specific question, legal as well, because something like 19,000 EU laws that will have to be translated into English law. So that's going to keep a lot of law firms and legal advisors busy. And probably public sector recruitment. It's been estimated that there's 50,000 new civil servants that have got to be created to handle the mechanical and process impact of Brexit. So, yeah, I'd set up a recruitment firm that is going to find a lot of civil servants to put into central and local government. Yeah, I mean, the tax regimes are interesting. Again, going back to the scale-up EIS, so Enterprise Investment Scheme, and SEIS, Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, have created fantastic conditions to enable businesses to start and access funding, and those investors to get very attractive tax breaks from investing in those businesses. It's arguable that Brexit will make it even more attractive in the UK, because it's currently viewed as EU state aid. As we move out of that regime, we have the opportunity to make it even more attractive. So that's all the kind of ebbs and flows of the whole activity. And I've heard somebody say that the consequence of Brexit will just be this low tax regime on the north coast of Europe. I think that's kind of quite a myopic view, because that isn't going to be enough to attract business to the UK, and that's why freedom of people is really interesting. That's why all the plethora of infrastructure we talk about, depending on who you read, that Frankfurt is going to be a legitimate rival to London as a finance centre. It ain't, because Frankfurt does not offer what London offers in terms of infrastructure, in terms of entertainment, in terms of access to skills and talent, in terms of access to finance. So I feel that there's lots of headlines being created around Brexit, and it is creating fear and it is creating uncertainty. And I think in many ways that's why the close down Facebook is, because what is real here and what is actually going to impact.
Just for the record,
life.
he said it as well.
Safety in numbers. So I think there's lots of noise out there. I mean, I fundamentally agree with what I think is the common narrative around this panel session, is that the future, it is a different future, but the future is there for us to collectively grasp and for us to collectively own. Opportunity is being created because we are in this situation of uncertainty. There will be winners and losers, but actually you've got the opportunity to take responsibility and accountability for whether you become one of the winners or losers. And I think that, for the people in the right mindset, for the organisations that do think more broadly and do think more strategically, that is a fantastic opportunity to really define what the next 5 and 10 years looks like, rather than just sit back and say, God, Brexit, eh?
Just a comment really on timing, and I think Dylan would like this, because he kept saying 2 years, but 2 years from when? I mean, we have the third round of French elections in about this time next month, UK general election, then it's July, say les grandes vacances, everyone's at the beach, then in September then we've got the German election, and all the time the clock's ticking. So I think the chances of the UK getting a deal done by the 23rd of March 2019 are slim. So I think this period of uncertainty and volatility will carry on for some time.
Yeah, I'll try. Yeah, by that. So we end up with a bunch of hybrid arrangements.
Or no arrangements.
Well,
We need a plan.
there'll be something. I think. We shall see. But this is why it's exciting.
Can any of you see any way that this won't happen? There will be some big event of some sort that will derail the whole thing, and it will be as you were.
Well, North Korea.
Yeah.
You go back, like, if you look like in the history of the 20th century, right, and you go back to the 70s and 60s, there were, this is not quite an unusual, this is not an unusual pattern. So I think it's
It'll be the economy, stupid. I mean, what's going to happen if we had a spiritual sort of a chat outside to say if there was a referendum again tomorrow, would it be materially different? I don't think it would. I have huge respect for UK voters right across the spectrum who went to the ballot box and said, this is how I feel. And it doesn't have to be something that I might agree with, or it doesn't have to be something that I might say is rational. It's what people feel, and they expressed it. And to be honest with you, if we had a referendum in this country anytime soon with the exact same question on the sheet, well, of course, we're smart enough to know you wouldn't ask that question, and if you didn't get the answer, you'd vote again. And again, as long as it takes. But the reality is, it'll be the economy, stupid. If the UK tanks economically, and none of us want to see that happen, because if they tank, we tank by 1/3 of that. That's already been calibrated. So the issue is, at what point would jobs be lost to such a degree in our friendly next door neighbour that it would make mothers and sisters and wives and husbands and uncles and partners go back to their local councillors and say, you brought this upon us, not the EU, and what are you going to do about steering us home again? It wouldn't be unheard of. It would be all sorts of messy, and it would have come after a lot of real human pain inside families, the length and breadth, not of London actually, but pretty well everywhere else outside London. And in those circumstances, you would get a political adjustment, but I don't see that coming anytime soon to that degree.
Time for one, maybe two questions. Anyone else to throw it out? Yes, yourself.
Yeah, just a quick question for the full round. I've heard a lot ever since Brexit. Ireland is going to be the only country in the EU that uses English as a native language, along with Malta. But I just want to ask the panel: is this a realistic opportunity where we can make the most of using English as a way of attracting, especially tech companies where the vast majority of code is in English? You know, a broad spectrum of different countries can kind of benefit from English as a fourth language. Is that a realistic opportunity, or is that just a myth?
It's definitely consider it for any American company I know that comes to Europe or thinks about Europe. Language is pretty much the first thing. So yeah.
I think there will be opportunities around that, for example, in international education. It's certainly something we're seeing increased interest now in international students coming to Ireland. But on that point, I was in Cork at an event last week, and a Cork man stood up and said that Cork is now the second biggest city in Europe who speak English.
Of course it is. Why did it say it's the biggest?
But there will be opportunities in a lot of areas, because remember, in the EU as well, there is a need for English speakers. So there is an opportunity for Ireland across a lot of areas. But it may not be as big as we would like to think.
Consider Cork as a different dialect.
Fair point. I'm not from Cork, by the way.
Well, glad you said that, because I can understand the word you said. Scotsman. Guys, I'm going to draw it to a close here. I think we've had a really, really good hour. I think we were saying beforehand will we fill the hour, but I think we've done it quite comfortably. So I'd like to thank John, Dylan, Anne and John for the contributions. I'd like to thank you guys for coming along. I'll let you get off and enjoy the rest of today, and I hope you have some good sessions after this. Thanks very much.